goal setting and working towards those goals is very much a part of our family culture. So it's really integrated in conversations throughout everything we do. So it's definitely a huge part. But the thing I think that's important is that goals don't become mandates.
Welcome to the Homeschool Perspective, where seasoned homeschooling moms share tips, insights, and resources to empower your homeschool journey.
Welcome back to the Homeschool Perspective. It is that time of year again. The pencils are sharp, the planners are out, and the excitement and maybe a little bit of chaos are in the air. Whether you're a seasoned homeschooler or you're just starting out on this wild and wonderful journey, this episode is for you. Today, we're diving into a topic that you either love or smile and nod at when someone brings it up, setting concrete goals and intentions for the school year. Are goals and intentions really needed to homeschool well? Or is there a more flexible, stress-free approach that might work better for you and your kiddos? We're here to explore all the options, share some laughs, and hopefully make your homeschool journey a little brighter. Let's get started. So, ladies, let's jump in. Do you think that goal setting is appropriate for kids?
Yes.
Yeah. I do.
I absolutely do. Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that we do. We all might feel that way because, Lisa, I think you probably do too as well. Yeah, but the way we go about it, I'm sure, is a lot different just from what I know about each of us and our personalities and things like that. So, I'm obviously more just in my head thinking through goals, having goals set. We're verbal about it. We talk about it. And then I just kind of hold those goals or those ideas or things that they want to accomplish, their goals, my goals, kind of hold it all together. I have started writing them down just as we've gotten a little bit more complex with having 4 kids that are homeschool age and 4 schedules that we, 5, including mine, but like that we have to get through during the day. So those goals, are getting a little bit more, and especially as my kids get older, having to write some things down is a necessity at this point. But for the longest time, I thought I was running with it, but just rolling with it and not really setting goals, when in reality I just wasn't writing them down.
What about you, Allie?
Well, of course, I've got a system. So I have a system for setting goals and checking in on our goals. And we set them with the kids. So my husband and I will sit together and we set goals that we have for the kids. Usually those ones are related to character or personal development. That might be something we want to make sure we're putting in the forefront. And while we discuss that with our kids, we kind of lead the way there. Although our kids have created character goals for themselves in the past. But largely we have, I know it's amazing how when you give kids room to think about, process, and lead in what they want and how they want to grow and learn, how much awareness they actually have, right? Mm-hmm. They are aware of where they want to go. And I think having that space and having those conversations makes more room for it. But my husband and I will have a conversation and we kind of talk through things that matter to us. And then we have a conversation with each kiddo and we set goals. We have those goals in our homeschool Bible, right? Like that big binder I have that we have all of our stuff in, and we check in on them monthly or quarterly. Our big check-in is the new year, like in January, when we look back on the year, we're always checking in on that and kind of seeing what progress we're making towards those goals or intentions and what we want to adjust for the future. But even my husband and I do this, like every week, every Sunday, we have a meeting and we talk about our goals for our family, our financial goals, our personal goals, so that we can always be supporting each other and moving forward. So goal setting and working towards those goals is very much a part of our family culture. Mm-hmm. So it's really integrated in conversations throughout everything we do. So it's definitely a huge part. But the thing I think that's important is that goals don't become mandates. So I feel like that's something that it's not used to hold over somebody. I think when a goal is set and it's like, you will X, Y, and Z, I don't think that's a goal. I think a goal has to be something that the person who's participating in has buy-in for. So like if we're setting a character goal for our kiddo that our kiddo doesn't express much interest in, then the goal's not for them. The goal's for us. What are we doing to build the environment and the opportunity to practice this skill? I really think you have to have buy-in and have to have an opportunity to lead the way for yourself in a goal. So I do think as far as whether or not goal setting is appropriate, I think the way we approach it is a huge part of the level of appropriateness for a child. Even our 4-year-old sets goals. And, one of his goals right now is to get mom and dad to agree to a reptile pet. I don't foresee him being successful in that. However, in pursuing that goal, he's learning art of negotiation and sales and all kinds of things. So they can all set goals, but I really think it has to be in partnership. I really think that the person who is going to achieve that goal has got to be a huge part in setting it and in determining how it will be achieved.
Hmm.
I totally agree with that. I'm reading a book right now called Raising Mentally Strong Kids, and it's by Faye and Amin. And one of the things that he says is that his dad, growing up, one of the authors, was sharing how he wanted a dirt bike, and his dad was like, "Okay, well, what's your plan to make that happen?"
Mm,
And then he told his son to feel free to enjoy it as long as he obeyed the safety rules, right, that came with it. And he said, well, inevitably, I stopped obeying the safety rules, but my dad wasn't the bad guy because he gave me the freedom. He asked me what my goals were, and then he gave me the boundaries to be successful with them. And I love that approach. And like you
mm,
said, their goals, not mandates. And if our kids don't have buy in, then they become our goals, not our kids' goals.
Hmm.
And, when we talk about the difference between healthy and unhealthy goals, because that's really was that question, is goal setting appropriate for children? It's really, is it healthy for children?
mhm.
And so that line that you drew there, that I think really expresses where it becomes healthy or unhealthy. I think we've all probably experienced being Gen Xers at one time or another, a really driven parent who set goals for us that we didn't buy into. I feel like that was kind of a part of
Yeah.
our culture growing up, right? And I love that we have the freedom to change that for our kids, but also to teach them how to set realistic goals and not unrealistic expectations for themselves. Do you guys
Mhm.
have any experience with your kids going, I don't want to set goals, or ooh, I love setting goals, like with their personality differences and their experiences? Or are your kids all kind of on board at this age? Because I know yours are younger than mine.
I'd love to hear your experience though, Lisa. Like with
Yeah.
with having your kids that are all across the board, like the older and the younger, what have you found?
So what we found is our kids buy in when they're younger. They love it. They think it's exciting and it's a fun challenge. It's
Mm,
when they hit that tween age that they start to go,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't want to set that goal. And it usually comes down to I don't want to fail at achieving that goal.
mhm.
Like when we have the conversation, but it takes a while to get there. And I switched probably 6 or 7 years ago now to doing our goals at the beginning of the school year to doing our goals over our winter vacation so
Mm.
that there's less pressure attached to their academics. So their character goals
Oh.
go in the new year and their academic goals go at the beginning of the school year. So every year in July, they get to think about what we ask 3 questions. What one new skill do you want to learn?
Mhm.
What one new area do you want to explore? And what is something you want to become more of an expert in? And so they answer those 3 questions for us at the beginning of the school year, and that kind of becomes their goal framework. And then in the new year, we just, we say, how's your life going? How are your friendships? How are you feeling about your relationship with the Lord? How are you feeling about your relationship with your family, with yourself? And we talk through goals on that end. And we've separated them so that their character is never tied to their performance.
That's really good.
I
That's really
I
smart.
love that distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about as you were talking, there are, families who are struggling with, well, even just preteen hormones and teen hormones and the having those discussions
Oh.
where, anything that's driven by parents can be more of a challenge. But I also think it's really beautiful that if you keep having that conversation and realize that it is that fear of failure, helping them learn how to break big goals down in ways that feel more manageable. Because you don't want to be an adult, or we don't want to raise adults. Maybe I'm speaking for people here, but we don't want to be raising adults who are like, oh, I'm not trying for that because it's too big and scary. Right. We want to be modeling and having those conversations all the time. But I do want to take a moment to think about I've worked with families that have kiddos who are really struggling with oppositional defiance disorder or other neurodivergence that makes getting started with something like this very daunting, especially if they're starting something like this later on down the path. And I feel like I've talked to parents where, they'll hear this conversation and they just are like, oh, like eye roll, exhaustion, like, why are you like, of course that works for you. That works for your kid. That doesn't work for everybody. And I think that's an important part of this conversation, because if goal setting or the way you're approaching the conversation is not healthy for the relationship that you have with your child, that's something to consider too, as far as the health of goal setting. So if you're in that situation, do you guys have another idea on how you could approach more of a growth mindset? Because when I think of goal setting, that's what I'm aiming for, right? I'm aiming for a growth mindset and continuing to grow and expand. But there's a lot of families where this issue is a really contentious one.
Yeah.
I've worked with kids with ODD and RAD.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we did was, it's really important. And this is actually the author, one of the two authors of that book I mentioned, Faye, wrote a book called Love and Logic. And that is a fantastic book for parenting if you have kids who are more challenging or who resist any kind of guidance from you, because it puts a lot of the power into their hands. So you're still the parent, you're still setting the boundaries, but you're putting them kind of in the co-pilot seat. They're taking ownership and responsibility for it. So for example, in that book he used, he really wanted a dirt bike and his dad didn't say no. His dad and he didn't even say, I won't pay for it for you. He just said, what's your plan to buy one? And then he said, feel free to enjoy it as long as. And so what we have found working with kids with those challenges is and it's hard not to take it personally. It's hard not to say, but we could do better than this. It's really challenging as a parent to step back. But when you step forward and you say to your child, what do you want out of life? What makes that an important goal for you? What's the first step towards making that happen? And then you say, okay, great. How do you want to make that happen? And you listen to them and you say, that's awesome. Give me, why don't you give me a step-by-step plan for how you want to make that occur? Right? So maybe you have a kid who wants a ton of screen time because they want to be a video game developer, but they don't want to sit down and do the rest of their schoolwork. So you say, you know what? I think that's a great goal. What's your plan for doing that? And they say, well, I could play video games 10 hours a week. And you say, okay, that's fantastic. Feel free to start that as soon as you're done with your 5 math lessons for the week. And now it's all in their hands. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, okay, I'm not saying no, but I am saying, here's the standard. And so letting them set the goals, in my experience, every kid is different. Every situation is unique. There are so many factors at play that we can't take into consideration, in a short podcast episode, which is why, talking to somebody helps. But in my experience, giving kids that choice to say, this is what I want, and giving them the freedom to say, this is how I plan to do it. Even if you see that plan is going to fail, letting them take the steps to do it if they're not open to your feedback. And when they're like super upset, you can say, hey, would you like to talk about it? And maybe we can come up with a new plan. And they'll say yes or no. And in my experience, giving them that freedom to fail is one of my personally hardest things as a parent, but one of the most valuable parts of parenting. Yeah. Because we're equipping them to fail and regroup as adults, not stay down because they've never done it before.
Yeah. I love that too, because that is goal setting, right? Like asking them to come up with a plan for what they want. That is goal setting. So sometimes I think we look at things and we're like, it has to be done this way. Like it has to be a written goal. It needs to be a SMART goal. If anyone has been in the workforce where they make you make a SMART goal, sitting with your child and be like, we're going to make a SMART goal. Now my middle daughter, she would eat that up. Like that is her jam, right? She is a copy of me. And she'd be like, there's a systematized approach to how I'm going to do this, right? Like we'd be all in on that. But then I have another kiddo where he'd be like, that is a waste of my time, right? Like it's not happening. But it is interesting because it's still goal setting. It's still growth mindset in a way that you're coming together. I also, when you were thinking, we have this joke in my family. Do you guys have like a ton of family jokes?
Yeah.
We have one that's been around for a long time called Stacy's Dad. Don't be a Stacy's dad. And when my older sister was playing softball back in the early 80s. Yeah, early 80s, playing softball, there was a dad who was so invested in the outcome, and he was red-faced, and he would yell, and he would get in there with the refs. The kids were 9 and like would just like it mattered so much, and he was so serious. And we have this joke like, don't be a Stacy's dad, or oops, there's a Stacy's dad. Now we shouldn't be doing that. I know that's not kind, but it just it became this joke. But it makes me think like, even if you're not at the level of a Stacy's dad, this is one of those things that we can get so hyper fixated on. Like, well, and it becomes a part of our own ego. Like, I want my child to achieve this goal, or we set this goal and we are people who achieve our goals, and getting like so fixated on it ourselves that that it becomes impossible to have this actually be a growth mindset, and it becomes more about us. So I feel like when you're talking about ODD and RAD, like those parents have to lay themselves down so in such bigger and more in your face ways early on, that not all of us have done that. Where you really, when you're looking at goal setting and keeping it healthy, you have got to keep a distance from it and not make it a part of who you are or what your ego is, because otherwise it gets really unhealthy really fast.
Yeah. One of my favorite books that on parenting, not homeschooling, but parenting, is it's by Dr. Becky Bailey, and it's called Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline.
Yes.
And it is, you've read it?
Yeah.
It's so
it's
good.
in the stack right behind me that I'm
Is
reading
it?
this summer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. She talks a lot about, the whole book is on your self-control as a parent, and how you having this self-control builds, like, allows your kids to also model that. And it just is, it's really good for, I mean, for all parents, but especially as we were talking about turning that conflict and that defiance and all of that, and kind of putting it in their hands as far as the goal setting, but also removing yourself and the emotion from it. So like, it's just focusing on like 7 different skills, that lead towards that, and moving towards that positive growth mindset that you were talking about. I don't know, I highly recommend that book to any parent, but especially for this topic of like removing yourself from that outcome, removing yourself from the conflict of it, making it about you, and allowing your kids, really just recognizing that you don't have the power over what your kids are going to do, and giving them but you are the guide, and you are the model for that. And if you model self-control, then and these other skills for your kids, that's the best way. More is caught than taught. So that is the best way to teach them to do that. And Allie, like, that even goes into play where you said your daughter plans and sets her goals a lot like how you do, because obviously she learned that from modeling you. So I don't know. And we don't all have to have, the Allie version of planning and goal setting in order for this to work. But I just think that that's something that's really important to keep in mind, like just piggybacking off of what you were saying about, disconnecting from the outcome, and not making it such a big part of you, like what your kids are doing being your personality.
Yeah, and it's not even your personality. I mean, it starts there, but it's also your identity. Do you remember thinking, oh my gosh, my kid just threw a temper tantrum, I'm a bad parent? Like, we assign identity to it. 8 kids in and 20 years of experience now, I'm going, oh, don't do that. When I see young moms like, I'm such a bad mom, I'm like, no, you're not. You're not in control of this. You're in control of your reaction to it. Right. How you respond, that's the only thing that gauges what kind of parent you are, because that's the only part that you have a say in. And so when it comes to goal setting with our kids, it's the same thing. And, it's funny, I've heard other moms say things like, well, my kid pushed back when I tried to set these goals with them or something like that. Neither one of you said that, but I've talked, we've had these back to school conversations for years in our homeschool community, saying things like that. And I'm going, well, yeah, because you raised them to be free, independent thinkers. As homeschooling parents, what do we expect when our kids are
This
like,
is a
no,
good
this is
thing.
not going to happen.
is
And
a
let me
good
tell you
thing.
why.
Yeah.
We raise them to be that way. We have to expect it. So there's a part of me every time one of my kids pushes back on an idea, and I'm like,
You're
okay,
like,
cool, defend
yes.
that. Tell me
Yeah.
why. Like go deeper. And then I'm like, okay, you
Mhm.
win. Great. You got that one. And it gets me so excited. And so if we
Like,
learn
doesn't it make you proud?
it does.
Yeah.
It's
Well, you're
amazing.
just like, look at you critically thinking about what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's
A
fantastic.
little frustrated too. A little frustrating.
Yeah.
I think the younger they are, the more frustrating it is because they don't have that logic brain yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just irrational to us, but it's just where their brain development's at.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I don't want to eat chocolate afterwards. It just means that, in hindsight, I can go, well, that's where their brain is at. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and then go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I have one of my kids had a really hard time. Like, I had to change my thoughts on education and, on homeschooling and everything based on what he was able to handle. As far as as far as how he processed the world at the time. So he is a very, very much a perfectionist, and he has never started something that he didn't, just do perfectly, like he wouldn't swim until he knew he could, like he wouldn't take his floaties off until he knew he could swim across the across the pool. Like he took them off one day and he was like, I tried. And then one day he's like, can I take these off? And I was like, sure. And so he took them off and swam across the pool. Like he wouldn't even
security.
try. He does.
Yeah.
And so it was the same way when he was like little and he was learning to color. He hated coloring because there was the chance that he would go outside the lines and he just couldn't handle that. And so and so what I really started to do and work with him on was, in education, we call it scaffolding. You build up you build in, and I would literally color like a whole centimeter of the line. And so it would give him a whole centimeter around the entire picture of that he was coloring, so that he had a centimeter to play with. If he went outside of my block, that I had colored, he was still within the lines. So it was like, so take that as a metaphor, because I did that for everything. I built that in as like buffer. Like you have this much room for error. And so in goal setting, I kind of had to work backwards with how I knew he was, like where he was at and how he could process things. And I didn't even have any academic goals for him at the beginning because he was ahead academically. And so I was just like, the goal was that being able to get through work, And so I started with these levels of scaffolding built up, and then over the course of the year slowly removed those scaffolds and was like, okay, you can do this. I think you can do this. And so it was more of a goal of growth mindset than an academic goal for him, but it had to have this padding around it, where I had to just have that space for him to fail safely so that he wouldn't lose his mind, but that safety built in. As a parent, you can start there and then start to, get less and less of that scaffolding built in so that they can start to reach their goals independently without as much of that padding in place.
I love that. I really do. Because you met him where he was at. That's beautiful. One other thing I think we need to cover on before we close up, because maybe it's because of the season I'm in, but it's that sometimes it's okay to set goals aside. Have you guys ever had a season where you've just had to like singularly focus on, maybe it's caregiving for an elderly parent? Like I remember having to take care of my grandmother for a while, or just a season where there's a lot of sickness. Like we're a big family, so the stomach flu goes through the house and we lose like a month of life, or just whatever. Do you have any tips for moms for how to be a little more flexible with those goals while still showing our kids that we value them?
The first thing I think of when you're saying that is what Rachel said earlier: more is caught than taught. So like, I think the first thing is that there's life is also, when life happens and these things are going on, there's a lot that is still caught. And there's a lot of growth that happens where we have to learn how to negotiate with one another, how to compromise, to have compassion and empathy, to step in. There's so many things. There's so many things that they can learn and catch during that time. So I think just first is to relieve some of that pressure on yourself, that there just are times in life where that's okay. The other thing is, for me, there's been many times where we set those goals and systems and life decides to go in a completely different direction. And either the goal needs to change categorically, right? The goal needs to change, or we put that goal on pause, because sometimes you start on a goal and uncover another, just like what you're saying with the scaffolding. You uncover something that needs to happen so that you can be successful there. Things change. And I think goals should be there. If you're using them, they should be there as a light down the path, but not as your actual car to get there, right? They're there so you can see, so you have something that you're moving towards, and you have something to have conversations against too, something to check in on. But if there's a time where it's like, you know what, we're not going to practice piano 3 times a week right now, or, whatever it is, that's all okay, because it's still there to check back in on and set aside for a moment. But I do think remembering you catch more than, or what's you, say it again.
More is caught than taught.
More is caught than
Thank
taught.
you. More is caught than taught is just something that can bring some peace to your heart while you're in those moments. It's okay.
Yeah. And I think that, just like what you were saying, it's a time for shifting the goal. You've got a new goal for now. Like, pause. We're going to focus on this. And that goal, like those things that you're saying more is caught than taught, that's your goal now. In that moment, that's your goal. It's just a shift, and you don't have to go and write it down somewhere, or, like publicly announce and declare to the universe, this is now my goal. But that's just what naturally happens when life throws curveballs at you, is like, well, we're going to put that on pause, or we're going to completely abandon it, whatever it needs to be. This is our goal now for this season. And then we might get back to it, or we might not. And that's okay. It's totally okay, because it happens to everybody. And it's, I love what you said, that it's the light that you're going towards, but it's not the vehicle that you're in to get there. I think that's the key thing to keep in mind when we're talking about goals, whether, however you set them, and what's your process. And I love what you guys do as far as like sitting down at different times of the year and having these discussions. And we talk about it in the car, we talk about it, like, I just like, I'll pull my, I was on a walk with my daughter earlier this morning, and I was like, what do you want to learn this year? And like, we were doing goal setting. We were just having a conversation. So it's not like you guys have these like formal and beautiful moments that you guys create in your family. And we don't typically do that. I don't have a time of year that we sit down and do that or anything like that. And maybe I will. Maybe I'm going to learn from you, and we're going to start doing something a little bit more like that. But it's for us, it's more those conversations along the way that, just bringing I see you and I see where you're at, and I want to know where do you want to go? What do you want to learn? Why is that important to you? So I'm like really getting to know my kids, and not just, you know what I mean though? Like, you really want to get to know them, because these are humans that are going to be in your life for a long time, like hopefully long after, they enter adulthood, and you want to have these relationships and these foundations laid with these conversations, and really seeing them, who they are and where you see their strengths and their interests and passions, and then what they want to do. And so integrating that into your daily lives is, just having these conversations along the way, is a valid part of goal setting, right?
You're making me cry.
Oh.
Yes, but that's it. That's why we do this.
Yeah.
We want them to grow. We want the best for them, but getting them to be able to be a part of it and to have those conversations. And these are some of my most favorite moments, having these talks with my kids.
Yeah.
And because we talk about it, last night I was reading to my son before he went to bed, and he's like, hey, Mom, I know you're working on pulling the books for next year. I'd really like to sit in on that, because I think, and he's going off, but he has all these new interests, and he's sharing those with me because we do this. So oh my goodness, it makes me cry because my kids are growing up.
I know.
But it's so true, that relationship building that can happen just by, I love what you said, seeing them and hearing what they want and where they want to go. Oh, yeah. Even if you're
I don't think
someone
we
who
can
hates goal setting, that's the
That's what I say. I don't think any of us can go, oh, I don't want that, right? Like that's just beautiful. And on that note, we want to thank you guys for joining us on the Homeschool Perspective, because I don't think it gets any more sweet than that. And I hope you've taken from that. We're three very different personality people with different styles of doing things. And of course, you'll have your own personality and style to bring to the table too. There's no right or wrong way to do this. And we just hope this encouraged you, and tune in for our next episode. We thank you for being here, and we will see you soon.